Everybody, welcome to our Science Cafe. It turns out that we're counting down to 100. This is the 95th
Woo!
time at Science Cafe. That's a lot. You can applaud that. I'm Paul Adams. I'm Dean of College of Education and also ex officio director of the Science Lab Institute 4 Days University. We sponsor these open to the public, and tonight I'm glad to introduce again another Fort Hays faculty member, Dr. Amanda Adams, instructor of biological science, and apparently must be a topic that we're really into. Bats, the Rocvkstars tonight, and without any further ado, let's welcome her.
Thank you very much. I am so excited that there are this many people that want to learn about bats because I'm a little obsessed. Say my life kind of revolves around them. So I'm hoping by the end of the evening I can get you just as passionate and in love with bats as I am. So at any point, if you have a question, please interrupt me. I am teaching now, so I can get into lecture mode. So please pipe in, especially the kids. If you guys have questions, let me know. So we're going to start off. This is the extent of our data for the evening. We're going to start off with a nice pie chart, and this is all of the mammal orders in the world. So all of the orders that make up Mammalia, so animals with fur, they lactate, that's this. So what do we think this biggest group is? Rodents, yeah. So if you answer my questions, you get a prize. There you go. Hold on to it. You have to pass it to the next person. So yeah, so this biggest group on this pie chart are rodents. And notice I say rodents, and that does not include bats. This next biggest group are Chiropterans, which are bats. And Chiroptera is the order of bats. They are their own group, totally separate from anything else. All of them fly, all of them have wings. So anytime you think of a bat, that's a bat, and they are in their own group, Chiroptera. And that means hand wing. So their wings are the same as our hands, just longer fingers and skin membrane between them. So they're essentially like flying with jazz hands all the time. But that is what bats are. They're Chiropterans. So I guess my made-up title is I'm a chiropterologist. And then there are about 1,300 species of bats out there. So it's about a quarter of all mammal species are bats. So that is the reason I'm in love with them, is the incredible diversity of bats that are out there. Makes it really fun to study them, really fun to learn about them, because they're always doing something weird and breaking rules, and you can never make a generalization about bats. So I'll show you, okay, we're losing some of my fonts, but bats are incredibly diverse, and here's just a sampling, a tasting of how crazy they are. So we have from these long-eared bats right here. This is a spotted bat that can live in like California, and it has these huge ears, and it can literally hear the footsteps of a cricket on the ground, and it's listening for that insect noise on the ground. And then you have these cute ones that are arguably the cutest bats on Earth. They're like little cotton balls, and they make tents in the tropics. So this is looking up into a banana leaf. So they take this leaf, and they chew along the seam of that leaf, and it collapses down around them to make a tent, and then they all cuddle. We're actually working on making cuddling a scientific term for bats. And then you have this crazy looking guy up here. So a great example of camouflage, so trying to look like a dead leaf. And you can see it has this funny tube nose. So this is a frugivorous bat, a fruit-eating bat in Australia. But they're pretty spectacular, and also we're still learning a lot about them. And then this sexy man up here, that mohawk is to impress the ladies. He also uses fantastic scents to attract in his girlfriends. And then this is another one of my favorites. This is a bat that's down in Central America, and it literally has suction cups on its wrists. Like, does it get any weirder? It really doesn't. So these little guys will live in curled up leaves, and they'll stick to that slippery surface inside the leaf. And what's amazing is that they have these really tight social structures where these three are going to find each other in another leaf, because this leaf is a brand new leaf. It's going to open up the next night, and they'll find each other the next night to live together. And then they have these crazy suction cups so they can stick inside these leaves. So they're just amazing. And that's just a taste of how crazy diverse bats are around the world. It's really fun. The biggest bat in the world, can anyone guess the biggest bat's wingspan? Yes? Ooh, you're so close. Bigger. Wait. 6 feet. How did you know that? Have you heard me talk before? Kids are always the smartest ones in the room, by the way. All right, we pass this back. Take something out of the basket. So this is the biggest bat in the world. It has a 6-foot wingspan. Is anyone 6 feet tall in here? Can you stand up, put your arms out for us, please. 6-foot wingspan. So there's a bat, much smaller body than Nick, much smaller, and 6-foot wingspan. So these guys eat fruit, and they live in Malaysia. So they're not here, but look at that puppy dog face. These guys are called flying foxes. That's their common name. So because of that really puppy dog cute face. The smallest bat in the world is called a bumblebee bat. It weighs less than a penny. And you can see this is an adult thumb here, and that's a full-grown bat of that species. And they're just amazing. But they live in the Philippines, so about the same. They're going to be overlapping in range with the largest bat in the world. Now I'm going to go through some of the diets, and this is one of the things that really separates a lot of bat species is what they eat. All of our bats here in North America eat insects, so they're all insectivorous bats. And these are the ones that I love because I study their echolocation calls, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But you can see there's bats, like I told you, they're listening to the footsteps of insects and they're taking them from the ground, they're on leaves. And then there's other aerial insectivores that only will take insects out of the air. But they're amazing for insect control. So I think it's about $3.2 billion in agricultural services that they're providing just based on that consumption of agricultural pests. So they're the #1 predator of the corn earworm moth, which then is a problem for corn farmers. And there's a whole slew of other insect pests that they eat across the U.S. So even in Central California, a lot of organic farmers have put up bat houses to try and increase that instead of using insecticides. So frugivores and nectivores are kind of the cute ones of the bunch. So frugivores, frugivory is the scientific term for eating fruit. And this is a bat in the neotropics, so in Central and South America, that eats fruit. And they have these funny, I don't know if you can see it in this picture, this little nose leaf. So they're called leaf-nosed bats. So they have this little funny structure right on their nose that helps direct their echolocation. But that's a whole really cool group of bats that have these structures, and most of them are frugivorous. And fruit-eating bats are one of the main reasons that we have tropical forest regeneration after deforestation. So they eat the fruit, and they fly really long distances, and a bat's got to poop. So they're distributing those seeds, and a lot of the plants that they eat are the first plants that are going to be regenerating in deforested areas. So these guys are really important for reforestation. And then the nectivores are like the hummingbirds of the night. So you have all these bats that pollinate flowers that are specifically blooming at night, we call them bat plants. And one of the really cool things about these nectivores is that we would not have tequila if it weren't for bats. I mean, I could just stop my presentation now, really, you know? Just go home. Done. Won you over. So this is the tequila agave, and down here, the plant that is around most of the time is where the tequila, they make tequila from. They distill the sugars out of this part of the plant. And once in a plant's lifetime, they bloom, and that is what the bats feed on, is the nectar up here, and they then pollinate the tequila agave. But what's really interesting is that for making tequila, they actually and become reproductive. So that's bad for the bats because there's a certain species that's endangered and they're not able to move and get these flowers that it can live on. But then it's also really bad for the genetic diversity of the tequila plants. So a lot of tequila orchards with these blue agave are in trouble because they essentially have inbreeding in their plants, which we know has a lot of bad impacts for long-term reproductive success. So there's been this this beginning to start this bat-friendly tequila cooperative. And so what they do is these agreements with tequila orchards, and they let about 5% of their plants flower, and so that the bats can pollinate them. So it's a win for the orchards because they get that genetic diversity, and then the bats also have their food source. So it's a pretty cool thing. It's still fairly hard to find them, but I can tell you the mezcal from these cooperatives it's amazing. So if you ever can find it, I'll let you know. I'll tweet when Hayes has some bat-friendly tequila. But it's fantastic, and it's kind of in the beginning stages of happening. I think there's only like 5 orchards that are actually on board right now. Thank you. Really? See? Now I got to go to Kansas City. Thank you. All right, that's hard to see, but our next diet for bats are carnivores. And I think this is the group that people would not guess for bats. There are a lot of carnivorous bats out there, not in the United States. Maybe the closest we get to a carnivorous bat is the very southern tip of Mexico. And they are cool, and again, very diverse just within the carnivores. So one of my favorites is this fishing bat. They literally have these huge feet, well, relative to their body. They're only like this big, the bats. And they will trawl, they'll basically drag their big feet across the top of the water and catch little fish. And so that's an amazing specialization that only a couple species of bats have. Another really cool bat, this is the first bat I ever caught, so I'm particularly fond of it, is this frog-eating bat. It's called a fringe-lipped bat. It has all these what look like warts on its lip. So you can't really see it, but it'd be right here on this bat. And this is also another leaf-nosed bat. And essentially these wart-like structures on their lips are sensors so that they can tell if a bat is poisonous before they take a chomp into it. I mean, how smart is that? They live in an area where there's tons of poisonous frogs and whatnot, and so they can sense that before they actually take a bite. And yeah, pretty cool. And so they specialize on frogs, and they are very attracted to frog calls. Yes. Yeah, so they don't eat a poison dart frog. That's exactly it. Good job. On it. And then there's other bats that will be a little more generalist in what they'll eat. They're just carnivores. They're kind of like the jaguars of the bat world, and they'll eat birds, other bats, reptiles, rodents, whatever they can get. The funny thing is, I caught one of these. It was the largest bat in Central and South America, and it only had a meter foot span, 3 feet. Tiny. And it was probably one of the calmest bats I ever handled, but it took like 3 hands to hold it. But yeah, that's one of those bats that would eat anything that it came across, but it was also, and its teeth were just huge. But the calmest bat I ever caught. It was interesting. All right, these are the famous bats. Has anyone ever heard this term before? Sangivore. Can someone tell me what a sangivore eats? Blood, yes, so vampire bats. You got it? Blood, say blood. So these are vampire bats. You can tell by these really adorable, very, very sharp front teeth. They are amazing. They have all these incredible adaptations that separate them from other bat species. So they have these really big thumbs, and essentially a vampire bat doesn't just like land on its prey. It doesn't just flop down on its prey. What it's going to basically be going for, sleeping cows, sleeping sheep, you know, like livestock out in an open field, and they're going to land on the ground quietly and then climb up onto very gently to not wake up their prey. And so most bats cannot do well on the ground. They can get off the ground if they land on the ground, but they just kind of flop until they can get up. These guys actually can run. I need to add a video of this. I don't have it right now, sorry. There's research and there's video of a vampire bat running on a mini vampire bat treadmill. I highly recommend you YouTube it. Maybe we'll do it after this. It's incredible, but they just have a totally different structure to be able to allow them to move around on the ground. So part of that are these big thumbs. And the other thing is most bats, when you hold them, you have them very securely. A vampire bat will just turn around and like look at you and sounds a little like an alien. Like they just are totally different, like physically, than all the other bats. These cuties are two baby vampire bats, but you can see they have a very different nose structure. And a cool thing about vampire bats is that they are able to sense heat, so they can hone in on where a blood vessel is on their prey. But what they do is they have very sharp front teeth, and they just make a little cut, and then they have this specialized saliva, and they'll lick this wound that they make. This is all I'm glad you're eating. And they have this anticoagulant property in their saliva that makes it so it doesn't scab over. So I mean, imagine you got a paper cut. It doesn't bleed a lot usually, right? Because it scabs over almost instantly. So with this very sharp cut, their saliva keeps it so that the blood is dripping and they can lap it up. Yeah?
Why couldn't they eat and drink like what other bats do? Why do they have to drink and eat blood?
That's a great question. So the question is, why do they drink blood and not just be normal? Right? I don't know. You know, and actually it's pretty amazing. They have special digestive systems to allow them to be able to survive on this very specific diet. But I don't know what about that has made it so they can't eat other things. But they don't eat anything else besides blood. Yeah.
So does that lead to infected wounds, or do they have an antiseptic quality too, so it doesn't get infected?
So I think there is a bit of an antiseptic quality. I don't know a ton about that.
So they don't want their cow to get sick and die.
Yeah, so in general, it's a very, like tiny, tiny wound. So it's not going to be something that's just going to be like gaping open. I mean, as soon as they're done feeding on it, it's going to scab over pretty immediately. But I mean, one of the things that I usually don't talk about with bats, but it is always brought up in the question section at the end, is bats and rabies. So with that, vampire bats can transmit rabies. So there is definitely that transmission, yeah, that happens. But they only take about a tablespoon of blood a night. But what the other really cool thing about vampire bats is that they can't survive. If they skip a night, then they're going to die because it's such a specialized diet.
After they take a bite of the animal, does it anymore?
No, they take, the question is if after they take a bite of the animal, does it die the next morning? Another great question. No, they take so little blood that animal doesn't even know. Yeah. Like if a vampire came up and fed on a human, they wouldn't even know the next morning unless they noticed like they had a cut in a weird space. Yeah, it's not like Dracula. We'll talk more about vampire bats in a minute. All right, so here is a nice picture for those of you who are eating of a vampire bat on, I think it's probably a goat, I don't know. But you can see that they don't suck blood. They actually lap it up. So they're just like licking with their tongues. It's very dainty and gentle.
So would their tongue be like a cat's tongue so they can lap?
Actually, I've looked at other things about nectivore tongues. Please.
Like a straw, it's kind of like.
So, okay.
They roll it.
Ah, cool. Thank you. There's actually 3 bat experts in the room right now. So, if I can't answer questions, they can. That's good. Yeah, but they definitely have, like, I think almost everything about vampire bats is specialized. Like, they have a very different lifestyle than most bats. It's pretty cool. All right, so this is a quick nod to our bats. In general, I don't usually focus in on one species with my research. I look at communities. But so there are about 15 or 16 species of bats in Kansas, and we think about 8 in Ellis County. So these are all of our bats. Later, at the end of tonight, I'm going to show you a live big brown bat. And let's see, what else do we have? The northern long-eared bat is our federally threatened species that lives here. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Evening bat is going to be one and the tricolor bat are 2 that are going to be hibernating right now, as is the big brown bat. And then the Mexican free-tail bat, the hoary bat, the red bat, and the silver-haired are all migratory bats. So they're going south for the winter. They're the smart ones. So this hoary bat is the largest bat in the United States. It's about that big. Huge. And it's also the only bat that's on Hawaii. So Hawaii has 1 bat, and it's the hoary bat. Different, anyway. Yeah. It's a good question. There's theories, wind and boats, but probably it was blown there off of a boat or something. No one really knows. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the threats to bats. So I've kind of told you some of the reasons why bats are so important and amazing and diverse. But now I'm going to tell you a couple of things of why I really like talking to people about bats, is because they're having a bit of a hard time right now, so they really need our protection. The first thing, and this is particularly relevant in Kansas, are wind turbines. So wind energy is a tough topic for me because I was raised by hippies. I'm definitely all for anything green, sustainable. But wind energy, which is primarily owned by big oil companies, is killing birds in, we'll say, the hundreds a year, and killing bats in the thousands to millions a year. So there are huge numbers of bats being killed per turbine. And so when you go out and you're driving and you see all those turbines that look kind of majestic, in my head, it's like a death count. It's really awful. So part of the problem is that bats are very smart and they're curious. And there's some fantastic thermal imaging of bats literally coming up very slowly and just kind of being like, oh, what's this? And then getting hit like a baseball by one of those football field size blades. The other thing that can happen is it's called barotrauma. So there's a low pressure field that happens around those moving blades, and they don't even have to come in contact with the blades. That just collapses their lungs. So you find dead bats that are either have been hit and injured, or ones that seem totally fine, but then they have injured internal organs.
Have you ever like walked up to a winter line and just walked around it and looking for like dead bats?
Actually, I haven't personally. That's a great question. He was saying if I asked if I've ever gone and looked around wind turbines for dead bats. That's an entire job. That's people, environmental consultants. That's their entire job, is doing those. We call them carcass surveys, and they've also started using dogs that are trained to seek out bat carcasses.
With their radar, can they sense the wind generators?
So that's part of it. They know they're there. They're curious. There's almost like there's an attraction to them, and that's part of the ongoing research, is why bats are attracted. Do you have a question?
It just seems odd to me that they get hit by the blade. I understand
Yeah.
the air pressure thing, but I've tried hitting one with a broom, and it's hard to do.
And the other really weird thing is it's actually at the lower wind speeds that it's a major problem. So like when they're going at like full speed at higher wind speeds, it's not so much of an issue. All of the high mortalities are at the low wind speeds. So one of the main mitigation requests that have come out of bat research are to basically shut off the wind turbines at those low wind speeds, but they won't, most of them, but some will.
So you mentioned that they're very smart, and I'm wondering if over time, have you heard about rattlesnakes in certain areas stopping to rattle because hogs in the south are now killing them, and if they rattle, they're warning.
Oh, so they're like actually learning that
So they are learning not to rattle. Is this something that over time?
It's hard because there's not a lot of, you're not able to do the social transfer of information. So a bat that dies wouldn't be able to, there is a lot of, this is one of the cool things about bats, is there's extremes from solitary bats that are always alone to the extreme of colonies of up to 20 million bats living in one place. So that's the other thing I haven't said yet, is that the wind turbines are primarily killing migratory bats.
So one of the things that you have to think about when you think about animals, they don't deal with things that go in circles.
Yeah.
So they don't, I mean, this,
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
that they perceive, things are moving, I mean, maybe a zigzag, they're not going around in a circle.
Yeah. And I think they don't recognize it as a natural hazard necessarily. So part of it, it's migratory bat species that are being killed. And you think about where you put up a wind turbine, it's where there's good wind, and so that's also those major migratory pathways.
Maybe the turbine people could put bat whistles on there.
Yes, actually.
Like we used to do deer whistles on the Carnage for 30 years.
Yes, there is lots and lots of money. No, this is exactly, there's lots of money going into this research. The problem is so far, it doesn't work at all. Yeah.
Valley in California is that instead of having the waves, they actually have the tower itself is sitting in a circle.
Oh, I hadn't seen that.
And,
Is that helping?
It's a smaller area and actually is more efficient at actually capturing the wind.
That's cool. I hadn't heard about those.
A lot of, and that's a way to actually have
Very neat. So on the plus side, there are lots of jobs for bat biologists because of the death tolls at wind energy facilities. But that is, acoustic deterrents are being looked at. And actually, I was in my previous lab, we were testing. It wasn't working. But there's still hope that we can figure one out that works, because it is the best solution so far.
Well, you understand that will cause a whole other issue of problems. Because there are a lot of people who are afraid of the silent noise created by
I had a community group contact me to be like, to try and bring me in as an expert for the bats because they didn't want a turbine in their backyard because of that purpose. Keep coloring.
Only the back could hear.
Yeah, well, that's the same thing with the acoustic deterrents. They'd be high frequency where humans wouldn't be able to hear, and also the level of the nacelle that up that top where we're talking about is so high up that there's no way we're hearing that either. But so yeah, wind energy is killing migratory bats in the millions, and it's pretty awful. And this is happening worldwide, not just here. It's everywhere. A lot of the people propose, okay, then we move out into the oceans, having the wind turbines offshore, and that's, I think, probably a better solution. But then there's whole other issues that arise from that, and the other part is then we just can't really test, and if a bat does die out there, we wouldn't see it. So whatever impacts it would have, we wouldn't find them. So that's the other side of that. White nose syndrome. Who's heard about white nose syndrome? Yeah, awesome. It's been very big in the news. It is a cold living fungus that arrived in the United States, we think in about 2006, and has been wiping out local populations at like about 99% mortality in these caves that it gets into. So it's this fungus. It's been named white nose syndrome because you can see it they have the first bats that were found with it had these little white muzzles from from those fungal spores growing around them. And like I said, there's been about 99% mortality where we walk into caves and there's literally a carpet of dead bats. It's awful. And it's been a long time. This fungus has been renamed once already, but it was named in 2006. So you think we're starting at nothing. We didn't even have a name for it when we first discovered it, and it was already killing bats. So we're playing a lot of catch up. And I would say in the past few years, there's been huge progress with it. But this is where it started in New York, in this cave, in 2006, 2007 in the winter. And kind of this heat map is where it first spread to, and then it has spread out and since made it into Kansas last winter. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to this map this winter. But it's just been rapidly spreading across the country, and the really, really scary one is over here. And part of, I guess, the theory on how it got to the United States was that it was brought over from Europe. So there are caves in Europe where they find this fungus and the bats are fine. So they've been living with them and growing with this fungus forever. But then it comes over here and is introduced, and bat species who have never encountered it are dying. Of a scary one? There's no scary bats. I don't have any scary bat pictures. You want this one? Is that what you wanted? This is scary.
Absolutely terrifying. So I've done a little reading on this because I'm a chemist and I make drugs.
Mm-hmm.
This is like right up my alley.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that treat the white nose syndrome are for what I would call cheap, really easy to get your hands on, and not exactly what I call harmful chemical. I mean, they found that something as simple as benzaldehyde,
Yeah.
basically synthetic almond extract, will treat this when vaporized.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like something we could easily do. Why aren't they doing?
So I would say they just found treatments, like viable treatments, within the past year and a half.
Okay.
Those just came up recently. And now there's a lot of advocates who just feel like, go spray it, go. And then there's people who care about microbes in soil. I'm biased, but we all have our loves, and everything is important in the ecosystem. So we're at the point 11 years later where we know a lot about this fungus now. We actually have a good grasp of why the bats are dying, and we have an idea of things that will treat it and kill the fungus. But now it's how do you go and do that across this entire area? And a lot of the toll has already been taken. So a lot of what's been going on now with research is focusing on the 1% that has survived. Like, why did those ones survive in those caves that were infected?
There's places that have been around now for 12, 13 years. When you go back to where first, are they showing any resistance or population coming back?
Yeah. So that's exactly it. Now there are individuals that were more resistant. So what happens with this fungus is that it's cold loving, so it persists in the caves year round. And because caves are very stable temperature, that's why it's able to persist. Bats who hibernate will go into that during winter, and then once spring comes around, they'll go out to their summer colonies. And those ones that survive the winter will go on and they actually shed the fungus. It doesn't survive through the winter. It's too warm in their summer roosts. They reproduce, but then they go back to those same caves. And the other thing is that's part of the spread was from humans, and part of that spread was just because bats move around a lot. They can fly really long distances, and they go from cave to cave, and they infect the caves themselves also. So a lot of that is part of it. Some bats would survive the first year of it, and then they wouldn't survive the second year. And then there's some that have persisted and just keep making it, and we're really focusing on them reproducing now.
So are you saying that there's no advantage to treating our bat house when they show up in the spring then?
Yeah, really treating a bat house, the sun and those temperatures are doing it for you. Yeah. So yeah, it's a great question. So white nose is essentially killing the hibernating bats. So we have wind turbines killing the migratory bats, and white nose killing our hibernating bats. So the bats in the United States are having a really tough time. One of the most common bats in Canada, where I did my PhD, is now listed as endangered. It used to be the common bat. It's really scary. And that's also one of our local species. The northern long-eared bat is listed as federally threatened because of white nose.
Are you seeing any, like, we basically have an ecosystem of white bats and white nose?
Like just no bats left in the ecosystem? Is that what you're saying? There's been real shifts in the species that are present, is what we've seen. So now, like, acoustic surveys and stuff have seen the drops in the populations of the white nose affected species, and then there's other more resilient bats or non-hibernating bats that are more common than they used to be. So there's some sort of shifts.
Resistant ones growing in numbers and possibly geographic range as a response to the white nose spread?
You say, have there been increases in numbers since that initial hit? That I don't know. I would imagine so, that they're rebounding. I haven't seen any papers.
Along the East Coast of new species moving into the States.
So new species moving in, but he's asking if like the little browns or Septentrionalis are rebounding yet, right?
That probably existed for the bats that disappeared.
Yeah. So I imagine that'll happen, and I think that's why people are hesitant to just go and spray and have these effects on larger ecosystems, is because we're essentially coming to the place where Europe is now, where you have these individuals who are just resistant to it, and hopefully those species just start to do better. All right, so that's all of my doom and gloom. Uh-oh, there we go. Oh, here. Is that going to work? Did we get the sound working? No? All right, so this video is way better with sound. But it's okay. It's a red bat. So there's a moth flapping in the middle, and there's a red bat that's coming up and using its tail membrane as a catcher's mitt, doing a somersault, eating the moth in mid-somersault, and then flying off. So it's just, we're switching into, in the video you can hear the echolocation pulses as it comes into that moth, but really the acrobatics that is going on is incredible. And remember, this video is completely in the dark, and this bat is hitting that moth like with pinpoint accuracy based on its echolocation. Yeah?
How can you do that?
How do they use their echolocation to catch food? That's a great question. Thank you. So usually kids in the room can give me an entire lecture on echolocation, but since most of you aren't kids, I'll tell you a little bit about echolocation. That's fine. So this is primarily what I study is echolocation, and we use bat detectors and that have specialized microphones that we can put out, and they detect the high frequency calls of bats. And this is what I record. So this is a pulse from a bat. Along this axis, this is time, and this is frequency. So what this is showing is the beginning of the call is up here at this high frequency, which is like pitch, and then it drops down. This upper one is a harmonic. So this essentially is going to sound like, so it starts up high and then drops down. But this is over half a second. So this call is about 7-8 milliseconds long. And so bats are doing this and putting out these calls at very high rates. And with that, they get a lot of information from their environment. So they're able to tell if there's a tree over there and not to run into it. But the really cool thing is that they're able to hunt for insects with these sounds. So with that sound, they're able to tell the distance that insect is from them. They're able to tell the size of it, and even down to the texture. So what I do then is record this and use their echolocation as a way of telling who is flying around out there. So I can tell that this is a big brown bat because the call starts down here at about 35 kilohertz. So human hearing, the max of human hearing is about 20 kilohertz, and probably only 5 of us, not us, 5 people in this room can hear 20 kilohertz. Most of us are hearing like down at 10 kilohertz, and I think our voices are down around like 5 hertz. So we're way lower frequency than bats are, and they're way above what we're able to hear. So some bats are so like I was saying, this is at 35 kilohertz. Some bats are echolocating up to 250 kilohertz. It's very high frequency. So, but what I look at the shape of these calls and also the frequency, so how high it goes, how low it comes, and I'm able to tell these species apart. So the last one was a big brown bat, who you're going to get to meet later. And you can see on this graph down here, this is a hoary bat who has one of the lowest calls in the area, so it's down around 20 kilohertz. And then this is a red bat up here. So you can see how if I put out a detector and then I look at these calls on the computer, I can see which species are out there. And then we can also get other information, so what time of night they're out flying around, and then we can also be like, okay, maybe there's a lot of activity over here, maybe that's near a roost. And then we can also look for foraging activity, so we can tell if they're eating and if it's a good environment for them to be eating. So these are the types of things that I do with bats, is look at these and actually make students look at these a lot. But this is a spectrogram. So here's another video of that red bat doing its amazing somersault and going in for that moth. It's pretty fun. I could watch that all day. All right. So we're going to go through some of the bat myths. We have about 15 minutes, and I heard there's lots of questions, so I'll try and cut it off short. Bat myths. Give me some that you've heard. They get stuck in your hair. Thank you. What else? I know you've heard more. Sorry? Blind as a bat. That's a perfect one. What else? Oh man. They all have rabies. That's a good one. I don't have a slide for that, but I will address it. All right. You're going to know these other ones. You're just going to be like, oh yeah, I've heard that. All right. First one, all bats are vampires. That's one I get often. It's a pretty intelligent audience, so I'm hoping you know that they're not all vampires. But no, most bats aren't vampires. Who remembers how many bat species I said there were approximately? 1,300? Well done. There are 3 species of vampire bats in the world, and they all live in Central and South America. They do not make it into the United States. And look at those adorable faces. No, we're not convinced. So this common vampire bat is the one when we talk about vampire bats, that's usually who we're talking about. Hence the name common vampire bat. This little guy will feed on mammal blood. Cows, sheep, goats, humans, whatever is lying around. These other 2 are, I've never seen them. They're very rare, especially in comparison to this vampire bat. And they specialize on bird blood. So you think about all these things about people worrying about being bit by a vampire, and these guys aren't even interested in mammalian blood. So they're going to be looking for chickens or other big wild birds that are out in the tropics to feed on. So pretty cute, but only 3 species in all of the world, and not in Transylvania. This is the one that gets me going. When you say this to me, and you will hear this entire talk again. So I hear that bats are just mice with wings, or they're just rats with wings. Ugh. So we already know that Rodentia and Chiroptera are 2 separate orders. Bats are actually more closely related to primates than they are, and that us being primates, than they are to rodents. So not rodents. But the really important thing, besides the scientific correctness of it all, is that there's a big importance in their different ecology that makes a difference. So a rodent, how many babies does a mouse have a year? Lots. Lots. Scientific, lots. So lots of babies. Most bats only have 1 pup, 1 baby a year. So when you think about populations and what killing that mouse running through your kitchen does to the rest of its population, it barely makes a dent, right? Bats, if you kill 1 bat, it has a significant impact on that population because they only have 1 a year, 1 baby a year. So they reproduce very slowly. The other crazy thing is how long does a rodent live? Yeah, too long. Oh man. We'll say a year, 3 years if they're super lucky and they didn't meet whoever said too long. The longest lived bat that we know of lived to be 45 years old. So there are species that only live to maybe 6 years, but most of them are up towards 10 or 20, and then we get to those extremes of 40. So again, a life of 3 years versus a life of, even on the low side, of 10 years, that's a very substantial difference. So killing a bat because you think it's a rodent and a pest can have a huge impact, and a negative one at that, especially if you're a farmer. Don't kill your bats. Bats are blind. This is one that everyone, blind as a bat, is a common saying. And I think it's because, part of these, I don't know where they came from. I think it's because a lot of bats have very small eyes, and we know that they're nocturnal, and they use echolocation to see in the dark. They don't have night vision. So just like we don't have night vision, but a cat does, or an owl does, bats don't have those structures in their eyes for night vision. So that's why they have evolved echolocation to be able to do all these things in the dark. There are some bats with little itty bitty eyes, but then there are also some bats with like ginormous eyes. And so these bats, a flying fox like this, doesn't use echolocation. This bat eats fruit. It just finds a fruit tree in the dark with its limited vision, but bats have about the same vision as we do. Just think about that at night. It's not great in the dark. So I think that's probably where the bats are blind, but there are no blind bats unless they were born blind just like we can be, right? I had a blind bat live with me in Australia, but it was literally just blind. Bats will get in your hair. I heard this a lot in Canada. I don't hear it so much here. I don't know really why. My best guess for why people think bats want to get in their hair is, at least up in Ontario, there's a ton of lakes. People are always swimming in the lakes, and you know how you get that swarm of insects that are attracted to you? I'm thinking if in the evenings, then maybe bats are diving down and going for the insects. But I've actually tested this. It was a mini scientific experiment. I was going in a cave in Jamaica where there was like 50,000 bats or something. And my hair in the humidity gets like really big. And normally when I'm doing field work, I tie it back. But I went into this cave and I'm like, okay, I'm going to test this. And there's bats, just more bats than you can imagine, flying past me. Not a single one got in my big frizzy humidity hair. So, huh? So I tried. I really tried. It didn't work. It wasn't a very effective bat catching measure. And that is the end of my presentation, but I think you guys have lots of questions, but I want to really thank you for coming. And in a moment, if you guys want to come up and hang out with me, I can show you my friend that I brought here. He came out of Albertson Hall today. All right, so thank you very much. And thank you. All right, questions.